note, a lot to dive into today. Appreciate you guys spending your Wednesday morning with us. Dak Prescott going to be probably the biggest.
What up, Dub? Get a fight count?
As the
What's
Dallas
up, right there?
Cowboys
1, 2,
have been
3, 4,
negotiating
5.
with Dak Prescott for what?
Thanks.
About 2 years now. And there are reports now that nothing is going to happen in terms of a long-term extension for Dak. So at the 4 p.m. Eastern deadline today, Dak is expected to play the season on the 1-year, $31.4 million franchise tag. So what's interesting about this in particular is Dak played for 4 years under his rookie contract and only made $2.7 million. So right at $700,000, a little bit less per year on average for a starting quarterback in the NFL is unheard of in terms of what the deal is that the Cowboys got for him. And they were unable to really take advantage of that and go to the proverbial next level while they had all that additional money to spend on other talent. And if you're not sort of a capologist or someone who has spent a lot of time paying attention to this in the NFL, basically the goal has become, in many ways, at least a big competitive advantage you can get is if you draft a young quarterback, they are paid so drastically below what market value is in the NFL that if you have a young quarterback under either the first round 5 years or even better, a 4-year deal without them being a first-round pick, and they end up a stud, you get a major competitive advantage. And that, for instance, is what the Seahawks did when they went to the Super Bowl twice with Russell Wilson before they actually had to pay him $35 million a year. He wasn't able to stay healthy, but that's one of the advantages that the Eagles had with Carson Wentz when they were able to win the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. It was because they had Carson Wentz partly under a very affordable contract before he started to make $31 or $30 million plus. Jared Goff. Look at what happened with the LA Rams, who are now in salary cap prison because they had to pay Jared Goff a ton of money. But prior to giving Goff all of that money, they had him under a relatively cap-friendly situation, even though he was the number 1 overall pick, but he led them to the Super Bowl. And so you look around the NFL, and certainly Patrick Mahomes is the most recent version of that, number 10 overall pick, but now he's making the most money in the history, arguably, potentially, we'll see, in all of American pro sports. And prior to that, he was under his rookie contract, and the Chiefs went out and won a Super Bowl. So what happens kind of going forward is an intriguing question for the Dallas Cowboys. Are they really that far apart with Dak Prescott? Will Dak hold out? I don't really know why he wouldn't, to be honest. It's great to make $31 million in a year. I don't think anybody out there is feeling sorry for him for this 1-year deal. But if you factor in that he only made $2.7 million over the 4 years before, and that the Dallas Cowboys set the precedent with Ezekiel Elliott, that if you hold out, you get paid a massive amount of money, even if you have an existing contract, I wouldn't blame Dak if he decides to hold out. Of course, this also raises the larger issue for the Cowboys, which is, are they going to Kirk Cousins this situation in some way? By which I mean, if you remember what happened with Kirk Cousins and the Washington Redskins, Cousins, I believe, you guys can look this up and confirm it, Cousins was franchise tagged 2 years in a row by the Washington Redskins after being unable to reach a long-term deal with the team. And then he just walked away, and the Redskins got nothing else. Now, the other question is, I'm not an expert on the franchise tag, and we just don't see it happen that often for quarterbacks in general. Is there any prohibition on how many years in a row you can franchise tag a player now? Will one of you guys try to look that up for me? Because we've got several players that are going to be franchise tagged. None as big of a story as Dak. But for instance, Derrick Henry is getting $10.7 million. And if I remember correctly with Le'Veon Bell, they tried to franchise tag Le'Veon Bell back-to-back years in Pittsburgh, and he set out the entire season in order to try to become a free agent. And I believe I'm correct that Kirk Cousins was franchise tagged back-to-back years, but that players obviously do not want to be franchise tagged ever, and they certainly don't want to be franchise tagged in back-to-back years. But the reason why, in case you're wondering out there, is if Dak got injured, and hopefully he doesn't, and he had a serious injury, let's say an Alex Smith-like injury that left him very, very substantially needing a long road to recovery, and it isn't like he's going to be out for only a few weeks or even for the remainder of a season, then he would have no more guaranteed money, and he'd have to go out onto the market, and he might never make the money that he otherwise would have with reports that the Cowboys have offered him over $100 million guaranteed, and him not believing that dollar figure the Cowboys have gotten to is worthy of what they are actually of paying him. So that is the story there. Let me bring in the crew, because I think this is also always interesting. What would Dak be worth right now if he were on the open market? Because that's the big debate, and I know there are a ton of Cowboy fans out there all over the country who follow along. I kind of feel like $31 million is about at the high end of what Dak would make, period. Like, if you look at Cam Newton and you look at Jameis Winston, and I know Dak is more accomplished right now than both of those guys, there was not a huge market in free agency for either. Andy Dalton is obviously his backup. We saw Teddy Bridgewater get around $20 million a year. How many teams would actually pay $30 million plus for Dak? I think that list is pretty low. I'm not sure there's any team in the NFL that would pay Dak Prescott on the open market much more than $30 million a year. Danny G, what is Dak Prescott worth on the open market right now?
Well, you've actually come up on your number, because last offseason, I remember both you and Dub had him in the mid-20s.
I think that Dak Prescott is somewhere around the 16th best quarterback in the NFL right now. Like, if you were just, which makes him dead on average starter in the NFL. And I think if you were trying to sketch out the best case scenario for Dak, you'd probably be like, if you were his agent, you'd argue that he's top 10. And I'm sure the agent will argue he's top 7 or 8 because that's what agents do. And I think you could also argue that he's not, that he's no better than 17 or 18 if you were trying to argue on the negative side. And I would put him right squarely at that, 14, 15, 16 range in the NFL. There are a lot of guys I would rather have than Dak. There are a lot of guys I would rather have with Dak than not, right? So I put him right around average, but I don't think there are that many NFL teams that would break the bank for Dak Prescott if he suddenly were available. In fact, like right now, who can you point to and say, because remember, right now there are a lot of NFL teams that either have a guy they kind of believe in and or hope is the future of the franchise, or they have a really young quarterback and the verdict is not in on them yet. How many teams can you point to and say, oh, they 100% desperately would need Dak Prescott? I just don't think there are very many, right? I mean, when you look around the league, and this is why Cam Newton had to take $1 million. It's why Jameis Winston had to take $1 million. There just aren't that many open jobs right now in the NFL where a team would say, yeah, we're really unsettled at the quarterback position. We're going to bring you in. We feel good about what Dak could do for the overall franchise. And even the teams that are bad right now, they either have a quarterback who's still unproven or they've got a brand new quarterback that they're trying to hope is the long-range future of the franchise. But, I mean, you just look around the NFL right now. I legitimately don't know that there's any team that would say we have to have Dak. Now, there's lots of like let's use the Denver Broncos example. There's lots of teams that think, hey, maybe this guy is going to be the long-range future of the franchise. I'm talking about Drew Lock, but there's not a certainty about it one way or the other. And maybe you could argue that John Elway, as erratic as he's been with quarterbacks, he'd love to have a guy like Dak Prescott. But I think Bronco fans are hoping that Drew Lock can be a top 10 quarterback. And I can't think of a team that would break the bank right now to go out and sign Dak if he were a free agent. So I think what he's making this year in the franchise tag is probably his ceiling. I don't think you could go much higher than that.
It is right there in the ballpark. A year ago, I said 33 was the max I would give him. And so it's 31 and change.
Yeah.
He's going to be making. So that's a good spot for him, which is why I think it's going to stay that way. It's going to play out. And this is going to be his make it or break it season, if you will, for the Cowboys. He is in a unique position because that Dallas Cowboy quarterback job is different from quarterbacking the rest of the league. You're dealing with Jerry Jones. You think back to his leadership with what happened during the whole anthem thing the first time around back in 2016, 2017, and he handled that really well there in Dallas. So
he's been fabulous off the field for the Dallas Cowboys. I don't think there's any doubt.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why you pay him, I think.
By the way, I could mention the Jags. Jacksonville probably has the worst quarter. It's obviously possible that Gardner Minshew is going to be good. I think it's also possible that Jacksonville has the worst quarterback position of anybody in the NFL right now when you look at their situation. They don't really have the guy going forward, and maybe Gardner Minshew is that guy, but I would say most Jags fans probably would be okay with Dak, but what's the dollar figure they would want him for? So I think probably Jacksonville is the wobbliest of all of the starting quarterback situations right now. The Patriots certainly, but now they've got Cam Newton. I don't think there's much uncertainty there. So I'd probably say the Jags are the weakest position of anybody out there, and it looks like if things fall apart for the Jags, they may be in the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes to potentially go in and draft him. Dub, what do you think about the value of Dak as we approach this 4 o'clock Eastern deadline when teams would have to get their contract talks finished?
Well, I think the deal that he has on the table right now is probably the best he's going to get because, like you mentioned, there's not a whole lot of teams out there that are dying to have a quarterback next season. Jacksonville's the obvious choice, but when you look at the history in recent times in the NFL, would Jacksonville rather sign Dak Prescott to $35 million a year or go draft a guy in the first round, maybe get Trevor Lawrence?
There's no doubt. They would rather go into the first round.
Every single team in the NFL would choose that route. So I think the market itself is not very big for Dak Prescott. And the fact that they signed Andy Dalton, I think, is a really key factor here because you look at the weapons that Dak has had over his career. He's had a top 3 offensive line. He's had a top 3 running game and a pretty good set of wide receivers and tight ends. I'm not so sure that – I mean, they went 8-8 last year. I think if Andy Dalton was the quarterback last year, they would have gone 7-9 or 8-8 again. So I don't think the drop-off between Dak and Dalton is that significant at all.
What about you, Eddie? How would you break this down?
Yeah, I pretty much agree, I think, with what everybody else is saying. I understand Dak has been a good soldier. He's been a good teammate. He's been a good representative of the Cowboys organization. And he's been a good player, not a great player. I just, I think what he's going to get is fair. I know he's holding out for the extra year, I guess, but if I were him, I'd sign the contract that they're offering him. I don't think he's going to get any better anywhere else. Now maybe he plays this year and has a great year and then can cash in, but I'm on the Cowboys side.
This is a never-ending story. Did anybody look up? I don't think there's any restriction on how many years in a row you can be franchise tagged.
No, it goes way up on the 3rd time you would get tagged in a row, which is why teams only do it back to back.
There's a new penalty,
yes.
Basically. So I haven't heard. I don't remember anybody ever going more than twice on the franchise tag back to back. But that will be the drama that will build in Dallas. Is Dak basically saying, "Okay, I'll play this year." But then you either need to be, as the Cowboys, willing to let me explore free agency, or you tag me a second time and we know that effectively this relationship is over. And it seems like maybe that's the direction this is trending. So, look, Dak, I'm curious to see whether he holds out, whether he immediately signs this. This really has been a never-ending story. I feel like we've been talking about it for 2 years, and the Cowboys and Dak have reached sort of a impasse in terms of trying to figure out what his value is. When we come back, appreciate all of you hanging out with us, by the way. We're going to dive into continuation of why I believe that we need to have college football. If you heard me talking about that yesterday, right now we are scheduled to have the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, Greg Sankey, on in hour number 3 at 8:20 Eastern. We'll also talk with Jeff Shorts, as we typically do in the second hour. And I'm going to give you the data on why schools should be opening up from kindergarten all the way through college. This isn't a complicated decision when you actually look at the data surrounding all the details in the coronavirus. We will discuss that as well. Appreciate all of you guys hanging out. Want to tell you the best way you can support what we do here at OutKick. How about becoming an OutKick VIP? If you love me, if you like what Jason Whitlock has brought to bear for OutKick, we are one of the 10 largest sports websites in the entire country right now, and we are growing faster than almost all of them. We have an incredible offer for you right now. Right now, if you become an OutKick VIP, you get an autographed copy of my book. We found some more copies of the book, so that's good, at least in the short term. May have enough to get us through this week. You also can get a VIP phone line access. You can hear sometimes people calling in on the VIP to jump ahead of the line. Also, get the right to comment on all of our activities on the message board going on right now. And we have exclusive events for Jason Whitlock, myself, and other OutKick employees that are just for you. All of that is pretty fantastic. All you have to do to sign up is go to OutKick.com. Again, that's OutKick.com. When we come back, why schools should be open up, more talk about the free agency deadline, the franchise tag deadline. Derrick Henry getting that tag as well. It doesn't appear that the Titans are going to reach a long-term extension with him either. All that out there as we move towards the 4 p.m. Eastern time deadline. This is OutKick on Fox Sports Radio.